Okay, so I'm going to reset us. So we were just talking about, we talked about police and we talked about this idea, not this idea, but Blackness and the experience of Blackness in sort of a global, on a global stage, and
Hmm.
what it means beyond just America, but how Black people and colorism is experienced globally, which I'm glad you're bringing that up because when I first started making videos, I was being reached out to from Black people around the world, not just in America, who were saying, like, in Canada, in Australia, in France, in the UK, who were saying they related to this, which what's interesting is that the white people in those places were like, oh my God, what's going on in America? What are y'all doing? And it's like, oh wow, the white people don't know what the fuck is going on anywhere, uh, or don't know what Black people are experiencing anywhere, because this is not just, we're talking about Black Lives Matter and we're talking about it in America, but the experience of Blackness and the experience of feeling less than and not being treated and feeling unsafe and being, not just feeling, but being unsafe, is a global Black experience. So you were talking about being in Puerto Rico.
Hmm. I mean, we've had so many conversations
Mm-hmm.
about this, and since our last conversation, I've had even, because even the posts that I made and all these things, like I've experienced backlash even from people from Puerto Rico. For example, I had uh, you were there when I had the Puerto Rican flag with me, and we went to the Hollywood march, and I spray painted BLM
Yeah.
over the Puerto Rican flag. Then I posted it, and I've had angry, angry people from Puerto Rico saying, "How dare you um, taint our flag with that disgusting bullshit of
Mm-hmm.
BLM," and like emojis of vomit. Um, there's no racism in Puerto Rico. You just, I don't know how to say that in English, but it's acomplejado. Like you have a complex. Like you guys are just, you're just always looking for that. That doesn't exist in Puerto Rico. There is no racism over there. What are you talking about? Aren't you Puerto Rican first? Which is also a whole kind of work. Uh, we're all Puerto Rican. We all come from the three different. There's this also illusion in Puerto Rico. We have, we're colonized by the Spaniards. We were one of the main points of the slave trade as well. So we have, the same Blackness in that regard. And then we had a great, and also our Native American community, the Taínos, the Arawaks. So, but there's this illusion that, oh, we're all mixed, so we all have the same struggle. So we do, and I'm like, nope. It's all these complications that have happened since our last conversation, on top of the fact of the reckoning that you and I had about me identifying as a Black person, like that. I was just like, whoa, and just to rewind on that, you you weren't
I
aware
I
that
was
I
not aware.
identified as Black.
I was not aware that, for which is like, it's, again, the trapdoors of our friendship and how they deepen. I wasn't aware that Ismael identified or called himself Black. Uh, and we discovered through a conversation uh, that it is my relationship to Puerto Ricans growing up in New York, which I grew up in Queens, and we had a big Puerto Rican population in Queens and the Bronx and whatever. And my relationship to Puerto Ricans in New York was that they were not Black, they were Puerto Rican, which was not a label I gave them. That was their label for themselves, that you did not call a Puerto Rican person in New York Black. They were Puerto Rican, period. And so Ismael, who is not from New York, but is from Puerto Rico, born and raised on the island, uh, I didn't have that awareness or that consciousness. And so,
And all the while, I am just talking to you and relating to you with the notion that there's that I don't even have to explain that there is an understood like shared blackness,
Yeah.
for over a decade.
Which oddly enough, like, it doesn't change anything because I knew
At
that you
all.
were
I mean,
having the same experiences that I was having. So I think it's funny, like it never came up because it never had to, because I did consider you black, but I guess without calling you black. Does that make sense? Like, I would,
yeah, and I mean,
out of respect, not out of like, you're not black. Like, that was never my energy. It was like, oh, he doesn't, no, he's Puerto Rican. He doesn't call himself black, is how I would think about it. Not that,
yeah.
how dare you call yourself black? Because I knew you were having the same black experience that I was having. We also talked about light skin privilege as well,
Yeah.
right? We
I
talked
mean, we
about,
go the baseline of like that's the thing. These conversations have to be responsible in being conversations that are layered. If you don't have time to talk about these things, then it's better to just leave it, because
yes,
you can't just go out and be like, yes, I'm like this and we're all the same. No, I'm gonna talk about my blackness, but then I also have to talk about my lightness.
do you
You
remember our
know?
reckoning? We had this is why we talk about, Ismael and I have each other's like button control pad, because that's why we are just genuinely brothers, because we fight like brothers and we love like brothers. But we had a huge reckoning over colorism, which we didn't have the words for it at the time. I remember that we sat down and we watched an episode of Oprah, and Iyanla Van Zant was doing an episode about colorism, and Ismael was like, that that is what you're doing to me. And I didn't realize that I had a relationship, like an unconscious anger towards light-skinned men specifically. That there was a feeling that as a light-skinned Black person, that you were getting more than I was, or you were being treated better than I was because you were light-skinned, which is the I saw that light go out, girl, which is white supremacy, which is white supremacy at work, right? Like, that is the system and the conditioning at work that would put me against my brother, that would put me
Mm-hmm.
against another Black person and be like, well, you're lighter, so fuck you, as opposed to understanding and wanting to understand the deepness and the complexities and the nuances, as you were just saying, inside.
Divide and conquer, baby. Divide and
Yes,
conquer.
to
That's
get
it's
to
a divide. It's a divide and conquer situation, you know, and that keeps all of us in these like tiny little boxes without going deeper into the root of it all, the history of it
yes,
all. It's
yes.
like a lot of people do not understand the concept of Latinidad versus race. Latinidad is a shared cultural heritage. It's nothing to do with ethnicity, you know. And then they talk about Latinidad as a race. So you're Latino, you're not Black. You know what I mean? That's if they don't understand the concept of that. They don't understand the depth or the transatlantic route, like what that route was. Like
Hmm.
a lot of people, even I mean, Puerto Rico, because of the relationship also with Latinidad and the United States, is smacked in the center of the islands, the Caribbean, and yet a lot of the islands don't even recognize Puerto Ricans as Caribbean people when we're one of the Antilles, when we're one of the West Indies. It's like, and even Puerto Ricans themselves. So it's like, it's this, it's fantastic. You got to give it to them. Like
The
structures,
system
power structures
works.
in place. Oh
It
my God.
works.
You're completely uprooted and taken away from your history, from your ancestry, from your past, from everything, in a way that it becomes your reality. And then there's a few of us who go deeper, and then you're like, wait, what? By nature or by nurture? You know?
Mm.
Because I grew up in Puerto Rico, and like negro, you're Black. You know, period. Like I grew up with that identity, and it's an undesirable thing. Um, and I mean, my curl pattern is changing as I start thinning, but it's again, this is 33 years ago when I was born.
Yeah.
Much less representation. Who is the hottest? Who are there's no Meghan Markle. There was Lady D. There's no Chandra Wilson. There's only Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. There's like
1000%. 1000%.
there's who's the hottest? Pamela Anderson. Who's the what's the aesthetic? Abercrombie and Fitch. Like, what's the hottest show? Friends. Like, doom. You're talking about culturally. Even though we're still young people, the shift. We are pre-shift. So we're talking about still the remnants of the most overt rejection of who we are. And again, we haven't even gone into colorism. Talking about you're not this, so you're that.
Yes.
And so growing up in that, and the slurs that I was taught, it called the even by my teachers. My teachers would in elementary school would make fun of my lips, of my nose, of the fact that my hair was like, that hair is like coily.
Yeah.
Gorilla armpit hair. And even my black friends who did not see themselves as black, they saw themselves as native, just because that's another thing. Oh, I'm not black, I'm native. And that were darker.
What is that? Well, I mean, that's the system, that's conditioning. That's
But they're darker, but they have because we do have a mix, but they have straighter, softer hair. That's where the math starts coming into. They're darker, but their hair and their features are finer, so they're lighter. In the Caribbean, there's this very specific math. Even if my skin was lighter, but your nose is broader and your lips are broader, then there's a shift, and like you have this class of.
Do you see my face doing this math? It hurts. It's like,
no, but that's what I mean. But you, for example, you dark, you have coily hair, you have broad features. Doom.
Yeah.
At the bottom, add to that, be a female just under that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
With the same feature. No, it's like there's just this weird.
Oh, I mean, I watched my mother, who's from Trinidad, born and raised in Trinidad, and very, very dark, gorgeous. But I watched, which I think is, I will say, is probably what played into our collision when we were like, 21, 22, is that like I watched her like fight to feel beautiful and like fight to be accepted as beautiful and be called beautiful, and like having to call herself beautiful, and because she was in the industry, and like, as you said, like this is like pre Viola Davis, pre any representation, pre Obama, right? Pre when Obama gets in office and everyone's like, inclusion, diversity, we want that. It's like trying to find yourself, trying to see yourself, trying to be a representation for yourself of like, I'm good enough, I'm beautiful enough, which I don't know how, what's interesting about that is I don't know if you don't have it, if you don't see it, and if you're being told that you're not, I don't know what possesses you to challenge it.
That's why I say nurture. I've been writing. There's this one specific role that I'm interested in, of a Caribbean man born to a slave and a slave owner. And I wrote an appeal letter the other day that is pretty much reads as an op-ed, long, and that's one of the things that I say. I don't know if by nature or nurture, because I grew up in a place where people saw themselves as they didn't see this. They didn't see the oppression. It was just, we're here and we're lesser and that's it,
Yeah.
But I saw the thing. I was like, whoa, do you realize that how we look versus the people in the movies look versus the people in the city look? Do you realize that? And I'm consistently, obsessed and very affected by this too, because also genetically, my parents are both genetically half black, but then it expressed in me more than my parents even, you know.
Mm.
I look more like their parents.
Mm.
So like even in my house, I would be like, you know, my hair was the only one that grew as a fro. Like my hair,
Yeah.
like my lips were the bigger, my nose was the big, so I looked more like their parents. So like it's just this whole thing in my house. I was like, oh, what
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
fuck, you know, having this struggle of to find my identity, and I always leaned more. I the only thing that I saw kids that looked like me was these kids like doing hopscotch on the credits of Sesame Street. You know, I love Sesame Street because
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
You know, because
I
I
remember
was
that
like,
being such a big moment when you got to be on that.
you know, yeah, but you know what? The kids that I'm talking about, like,
Yeah.
you see the streets of New York, which is where you fucking grew up, um, and I'm like, that's my people.
Yeah.
Those are my people. And so some people lean. That's the thing. You in this mixed race situation, a lot of people lean to this side, and they were like, "No, no, nothing to do with blackness." I was the opposite. I was like, I remember praying as a kid. I want to be definitively black.
And then what is the experience? I mean, I think what you bring up is like the mixed kid experience of like, where do you find your acceptance? Because I know that there's a huge demographic in the black community who'd be like, you're not black. What the fuck are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Or whether it's in contentment or in just like, no, but you're not. And like no malice,
Very,
but you're
but you
just
know,
not. Like,
which is
and like, and you are, but you're being told that you're not, or that you're not dark enough. And then obviously white people are not like, Ismael, honey, come sit at the table, baby. Like, they're not doing that. And so you're like in this middle lane.
yeah.
And how do you find your footing? How do you find your grounding?
I mean, it's on of itself is a struggle, and I always have to be very careful about talking about the struggle because you know, in the complexity of what we're talking about, people are gonna be like, oh, boo hoo, light skinned boy. You know what I mean? So I have to be very
But
contextual about
even
it and
that's your
sensitive.
trauma though, but like that's interesting because you don't, but I know that you feel like you do because people do say that, but it's like you've been pulled over more times than I have.
Boy. Yeah, that's what I mean. Like it's pulled over and thrown in there. Um,
You
but
see the inside of a jail.
but that's what I mean. Like I have this experience with the world, how the world sees me, how the system sees me, how the system treats me, and then this experience of how my people see me. So it's like I'm like, y'all, like it doesn't matter what y'all think. It doesn't matter this minutia that we're putting for each other. No, because of this, because of that, because of the hair, because the light, because of the. I was like, this is cool. Let's
But
talk
that's
about it
all
within
the system.
ourselves.
But that's
Yeah, let's
all
talk.
the system.
That's what I mean. Let's talk about it within ourselves, but let's establish that we're here
Yes.
so
Yes.
that we can go against this. But y'all, while y'all are doing this, leaving me in the middle over here is just
Thriving. And they're thriving over
and
there. Like,
I'm getting, and so I need this support. I need this community. The things that I mean, certain things that I had to backtrack in Puerto Rico. There was just like it wasn't like he's a mixed kid. No, it's just like he's a black kid. You're thrown in the black box, you know.
yes.
Then when I come to the States, that's when this variety of identities that are like, oh no, you're not black, you're Latino. Oh,
Yes.
you're light skinned black. Like
Yes.
one of our friends, I'm not gonna mention this, like illustrates very well. She's like, oh, I thought you was a nigga till you open your mouth. You know, and I was like, ooh, that was second month, first semester of NYU,
And
and I
you
was
got
like,
that a lot.
I
Which
mean,
in,
the police stopped me over, and literally that policeman was a black policeman, and I said, oh, he's not a nigga, he's a spick. When they saw my name on my driver's
ID.
license.
Yeah.
So these are factual things that illustrate a lot of the situation. Is like, oh, he's not this, he's that. And again, like I'm open to having these conversations. I want these conversations to be nuanced, but it's also a thing that we talked about that I said. But I think we have to concern ourselves as a community to first like just start unifying in different ways. Start.
Yeah, I keep talking about this. It's the qualifying and quantifying of blackness, right? Because there
Blood
even
quantum.
there are communities. I mean, like, obviously I know I'm black, but there are times when I haven't felt black, where the community has told me that I'm not black enough because I don't sound a certain way, or because I like a certain thing, or because I don't know a certain whatever, that I'm not black. Or white people saying I'm blacker than you, and you're like, wait, what? And so our blackness becomes qualified and quantified, and my queerness sometimes erases me from, not sometimes, oftentimes, most of the time, erases me from the black community as a whole, which we're seeing. We're fortunate enough to have been in LA, not fortunate, but like, we are in LA during this Black Lives Matter moment. And so there is a lot of talk about, black queer lives, but I know that that's not happening across the movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know that there are plenty of people inside this fight that look like me and that look like you, that are saying, because I'm queer, or because someone's trans, that we're not fighting for that life. Like, that's not what we consider black. If it's not cis and het and that, then it's not black. And
Yeah.
so, like, and again, that's the system at work. That's the patriarchy. That's the white supremacy at work, where we are dividing ourselves and leaving room for this thing to continue to thrive, as opposed to unifying and saying, no, I don't fucking care what shade like, you are
And
black.
yeah,
Let's cut,
and
like,
you're leaving people out of the fight, and they're leaving them vulnerable and in an unsafe space, because you say no, this is not for you. You're leaving a lot of people out, and it's like, because there's a lot black Latino. I experience, like, there's a lot of anti-blackness in the Latino community, and something that is
mm-hmm,
also, there's a lot of anti-Latinidad in the black community. So it's like,
mm-hmm.
and you hear, I mean, like, that's another podcast. It's like, it's I'm at the crossroads of this thing where many of us are, and what it keeps happening is that you stay divided, and you also, people stay vulnerable in places that need protection, and one of the things that you're mentioning that we're failing the most to protect is black trans lives, because they're at the crossroads, at the intersection of so many things, and we're like, oh, we're fighting for this, but I don't know who fights for them.
And we see,
Who fights for them?
we've seen that. Fuck, it's like it.
No, sorry.
Because it's the same thing that, like, the white gays did, right? Like, it was about gays and lesbians. What the fuck no, not for bisexuals, not for black gays, not for trans people. Like, it is about gay men, white gay men, and white lesbians. Like, that was the narrative, and honestly has been the narrative until June. Like, when white gay people were like, what do you mean us too? It's like, yeah, you too. Like, there is this idea that everyone is still trying to get to cis het white male. And how far are you from cis het white male? And everything under that is baggage. And so
Crabs in a barrel.
we're
It's
not
all.
trying to come together to fight the thing. It's like, no, cut that. That's gay. That's trans. Get out of here. Oh, that's what. No, I'm trying to
That's
get.
black. That's light skin. That's not from here. That's not from there.
That's not.
It's all these crabs in a barrel. And as you said, at the top of the food chain is this white
Yeah, yeah,
heteronormativity,
yeah.
and like,
Mm-hmm.
and this is, I mean, in my lane, I've had to like find my lane and what I'm fighting for. And a lot of what I'm trying to do is to, from both sides, unify, Afro-Latinidad, and have it merge and be recognized in blackness, because blackness is not only, also be like, y'all, like, blackness is not just an American thing, that's a thing that,
Well, I thank you for saying that, because I think for me, like, I think our thing at like 21, 22 was, my understanding of Blackness was African American, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's where the like semantic kind of breakdown goes, where you're like, well, he's Puerto Rican, because I'm understanding Blackness as just African American in my naivete, right? Where it's like, no, 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 like, yes, African Americans are Black, but that is not the only Black, right? The
Yeah, and
Black,
that's problematic. You know what I mean? To
yes,
make
yes.
to give validity, and there's another word, but yeah, like to become like the standard of all things often is American, is Western, you
Mm-hmm.
know, like, and to also standardize Blackness as an American thing is problematic, you know, because
Mm-hmm.
it comes from the same root of America, you know,
Yeah.
this is here, you know, and it's, you know, those conversations are hard to have, but it is part of that, you know, like, no, this is expansive, you know, a lot of people,
Expansive.
yeah, it
Expansive.
is,
It
and like
is. It
I've had
is.
to fight for my right to do, like, for example, to portray roles that perhaps were African American. No,
Mm-hmm.
but he can't. But a person, but there's also this English speaking thing. Something Blackness of England is seen more adjacent to African American Blackness, also because of the English speaking thing.
Mm-hmm.
There comes another one. Non-English speaking Black people are often also seen like, oh, are you guys close to
Mm-hmm.
this experience? You know what I mean? I was like, but if what like our brother that played MLK in Selma,
He
then
got a lot
what?
of shit. He got a lot of shit.
And we just had what's it, Cynthia, you know, do Harriet.
Larivo, yeah.
So I'm like,
Which, I mean, and this is like, that's a thing where you're like,
yeah, I want to know your notion about what your thoughts about that.
it's, I have to be really responsible, because um, I haven't sat down long enough to think about it. Like, in
Got
all
it.
honesty, like, I've heard both points of views. For me, I'm more like, okay, can we make just a movie about Black people, you know, fucking eating dinner? Like, that's where I'm at. Like, I'm like, I don't need to see another movie about you know, slavery. Like,
Got it.
I'm like, can Black people eat dinner, and can like a Black kid, you know, cheat on a math test and it goes awry? Like I'm so past, for me it's like, I'm so past
Pain
the only
narratives.
time, yeah, the only times that we get to be in movies is when it is for some kind of historical oppressive narrative. um and not that like, you obviously Harriet Tubman is fucking Harriet fucking Tubman, a fucking superhero, as is MLK. But again, it's this, the only time that we get to lead our movies is in that regard, as opposed to um being able to lead movies where we again just exist. So I don't know what my, I don't know. I think that what I do know is, I think the outrage and the anger comes from, again, crabs in the barrel, where it's like there aren't a lot of roles, and so then as an African American Black person, I get frustrated because this person isn't African American. But they're portraying somebody who is, and it's like, now we're just in, I
But
don't
that's
know.
the problem. That you're naming the problem right there. Is not any of us. It's like we're in a system that has such little opportunities for us, but then we keep fighting each other as if we were
As
the
opposed to
system.
fighting the system
You know
together,
what I
as
mean?
opposed
No,
to,
let's make just more opportunities so that
yes,
there's so many opportunities that
yes,
not like, you know, so but we live in a reality, and then we live in an aspirational, you know, we're talking about aspirational things, but in the meantime, let's just like continue to just understand what the system is, and it's not one individual. This ties into our other conversation as well. We're talking about systems. We're not talking about this one individual that did this or that. We're talking about systems, and that is my main thing, just to try to bring a little bit more awareness of um using the word again, how expansive this experience is, how expansive the conversation is, the old time but true cliche of like united we stand, you know, as we continue to recruit lost brothers and sisters in this experience, we only gonna just get stronger
I'm gonna ask you.
responsibly.
Yes, I'm gonna ask you a big question. Maybe it's the last question. How do you think we unify? And you may not have an answer, and that's totally fair. That's a really fucking big question. But
Yeah, it's a huge
do you
question.
have any? Do you have any? Just even like, I love that Brene Brown calls it the SFD, the shitty first draft, of just like
Yeah,
how do you think we can? It doesn't have to be correct or right or
yeah,
ultimate
I don't think I have an
at
answer. I'm
all.
gonna just be
Yeah.
straight up. I have a musing. I could muse about it
Yes, yes, that's what
in
I
this
want. Like
moment in
in this
time, you know.
moment, what is
This
the
is
musing around
Yeah,
how
yeah.
we do that?
And that's the other thing, like all these conversations are have to have an aspect of that. Like I will encounter different information tomorrow. I so will
And
you,
you get to change your mind and
and
stand for
this is whole canceling thing, and no, we're
normalize growth. Please fucking normalize growth. It is
yeah,
like
we're responsibly trying to do our very best to have these conversations that are difficult, that are layered, that in
absolutely.
which we are trying as best as we can to speak from our experience and also be like a little bit more global. Of course,
Absolutely.
I'm gonna say some shit that is gonna be problematic, and then I'm gonna be like, actually, I read a meme
It's not
that
well.
gave me
Listen,
different.
actually, I read a meme. Absolutely, so how it always
I
happens.
read a meme that
I I would say it's not about. This is a different conversation, but I feel like it's important inside of these conversations because I think people are afraid to have these conversations because they're afraid of being problematic. And I think it's all about the approach, right? It's like you're talking to your best friend, we're having a conversation, we're set up in a context of we are treading through this thing and figuring it out. It's not um somebody coming basic pitch, which is like somebody coming in and like touching your hair and be like, oh my God, like that's problematic. There is a lot of empathy and consideration here.
indeed.
And so you get to be wrong inside of being considerate, and somebody gets to say, oh, I don't know about that, or here's some new information, and then you get to adjust and evolve. But those two things can't, if everything is going to be problematic, then no one's going to have a conversation, and then we're not going to eradicate the system. We're going to continue to do the same bullshit. So
I'm there with you. I'm there with you. I'm just like we have to continue to have these conversations. I mean, you and I have quite often polarizing or polarized points of view, and
do
we
we?
discuss them. We've had. I'm even when we had this conversation for the first time, it took a few passes to start getting into
But was it
the.
polarizing? It was like
It had a moment, but like no, but again, it doesn't matter if it wasn't
fair,
polarizing to
fair,
you or
fair,
to
fair, fair.
me.
Yeah, fair.
I perhaps felt it polarizing, which is the same thing that we're talking about this
Yes,
conversation. I may not want to be polarizing, or you at the moment, the viewer is going to see something and be like, "Oh, that's polarizing." You know what I
yes,
mean? It's
yes,
like,
yes,
and
yes.
there's no
Sure,
intention to do that. So it's
sure.
like we're just trying to have these conversations in the
I
most
receive that.
responsible way,
Yeah.
in the most like where we are at this moment. You know, riffing sometimes more eloquently than other times. um because like for example I have this one thing, like I mean talking about global blackness, when I start talking about the relationship between British and American, Caribbean and American, that's a big area where I have a lot of blind spots, that I don't have a lot of information, that
Yeah.
I want to continue bridging, which it goes into the responding
The
your question.
unifying of
How do we unify? Like to muse is this, like um we've got to broaden the notion of what we have, like as you said, for you blackness at one point was African American, you know so we have to like try to just like broaden that thing as much as we can and be as inclusive as we can, and then from there, then we have our dinners and we have our conversations, and then we start establishing the difference in our relationships, and honoring them, and doing internal allyship, as opposed to external allyship. Like, you feel right now that you have to be an external ally to Black trans lives, when it should be just internal allyship. We're a thing, and from within, then we're gonna internally.
These are a part.
Yeah,
we're together.
yeah, we're all here, and the allyship
We're gonna
becomes
move.
internal.
Yeah.
You know, how
Yeah.
do we handle? But you're home.
Yes.
You're home, and oh,
Yes.
that makes me emotional. You know what I mean? You're home, and you're safe, and you're here, and
Yes.
nobody's contesting that. From
Yes.
there, let's talk. Come down when you can. Let's have supper, and let's talk about what is it that you
Let's talk
need
about
to
your experience. But it's also
know.
like, I love that. I love this idea of like, first, it's really about home. I think also for me, my musing would be um, understanding that something has been done to us as a whole, that education, that our history has been taken away from us. And so we are operating from a deficit.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of again, the qualifying and quantifying is because a lot of us don't have access to our history and we haven't been taught.
Yeah.
And so like there's an awareness of, oh, I've been conditioned to believe that I'm separate from my best friend because he's Puerto Rican and I'm from Queens. I've been conditioned to believe that, oh, that's something else. So that's the first thing, which I don't know how you get everyone to do that, but it's like, I think that's necessary for us to understand that we have been strategically taught and information has been strategically withheld from us so that this infighting happens and so that the system continues to work.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as you say, I think it's a matter of being like, you're home. And then we can talk about your experiences and we can talk about what you need and what do you need and how can I support you and how can you support me? And it's not about fighting to say who's the most fucking oppressed. It's about recognizing, to me, what my privilege is, where I have privilege and how I can use that. And if I don't have privilege in that space, if you have privilege in that space, how can you use this? The smallest example I remember is when Ismael is by himself, correct me if I'm wrong, Ismael in New York before Uber.
Oh, remember? Yeah.
Could not hail a cab. When Ismael,
Also, huge afro.
Couldn't hail a cab. When Ismael is with me, he can
I hailed a cab.
because I'm darker and I can't hail a cab.
Yeah, I would have the highest probability of getting. We often get, looked over, but at least I knew that when we were together, I would have the highest probability.
You would, yes. And so, like, understanding that, yes, Ismael
Yeah,
has his own
you remember
power.
that?
Absolutely.
Like that, you literally, like, if you're in a group, the darker people go to the back, and they step back as to not be like associated with the person that is hailing the cab. It's like this dance. It's like, okay, you go over there, I hail the cab. You know what I mean?
1,000%. We had every fucking Friday, Saturday night, I would stand way back. Ismael would hold his hand out, get the cab, and then you know what it is.
Yeah.
And it's like, it doesn't mean.
Oh, if Fernando was there.
Fernando was there. Fernando's lighter. Fernando would do. So but that doesn't mean that Ismael or Fernando don't have their own oppressive baggage. It's just that in that moment, they have to use their privilege to support me. And then there will be moments where I have to use my privilege to support them or support somebody else. And I think that I hope is what we start to do inside of the home that you're talking about is how do we support each other to move towards the promised land.
And just one last thing, it's uncomfortable that process is uncomfortable because it feels like when you're acknowledging privilege, you are denying your struggle. And a lot of people tend to do that, but that is not what it is about. One thing is one thing and the other is the other thing. Acknowledging privilege is in a thing of itself, period. It has a lot of power.
Yes.
And Oh, I'm not. That didn't happen. No, that happens. You
Absolutely.
know, like I have my light skin privilege, my light eye privilege, blah 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 blah, my male privilege, all these things
Yes,
that I
all
have to
these things.
contend, and I, the more aware you are, the more impactful you can just be. That's it. Like the more impact you can actually strategically arrive in different places.
Yes, and but it's like what you're talking about is that we are all after the same thing. We are all after the same fucking freedom, and so we don't need to fight each other about it. That crabs in the barrel again. It's about us unifying so that we can get that freedom, as opposed to
Yeah.
trying to fight each other. Um,
Keep the door open
each other.
behind you, though. Keep
And
the
I
door
will end
open
this by
behind you.
saying, because I know that we talk about this all the time, and we feel it. Black trans lives matter, and right now, all of us need to be using all of our privileges to protect our trans siblings, especially our Black trans femme siblings.
That's right.
Ismael, I love you so very much.
Love you
Thank you
too.
for this beautiful conversation. Um, Bye.
It was great. No, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much. It's been an honor. You know, it's like some conversations that definitely stirred up emotions and feelings. And when I've been doing interviews for quite some time in my life, but I think this is one of the deepest ones. So it even feels scary at times because I'm being quite genuine and quite authentic. And I hope that whomever whose eyes and ears fall on this are able to have the same attention to complexity and empathy and compassion about what we were talking about. We just want this place to work for us as well, and to be able to be happy and to flow and black boy joy.
Beautifully said. I love you.
Love y'all. Bye.